Alright, welcome back. This is Kevin McCain with Kevin McCain Studios and Idaho Art Classes. So we're going to talk about color mixing and how we're going to do it with watercolor. I'm going to be using one of three brushes. This is just a backup brush, basically a number 10. I've got two number 10s here because as I recall, I believe one works better for me than another. So, and then I've just got a 3/4 inch brush. A 1 inch brush would work just as well. And we're going to talk about how to translate color wheel information for then color mixing and putting it down and creating a color scale. So but you should already know about chroma and value and hue. If you don't, please go and watch that video that talks about, judging the value. Is it a step 7 on the value scale, step 3 on the value scale? If you have no idea what that number means or what value I'm talking about, go buy a value scale and keep it with you when you paint, because value is the most important thing to evaluate whenever you're looking at color. Then we have what's the hue, and the hue is it red, yellow, blue, orange, green, or purple. So we need to identify that when we're looking at a color. You identify all three properties. What is the value? What is the hue? And then what is the chroma? Or in other words, what is the intensity? And chroma or intensity is how bright or how dull is a color. So we're going to talk about how to create a color scale. And we're actually going to be varying all three of those properties. Now, if I have a color like this red, it should be fairly easy to understand that if I want it lighter, all I have to do is, is the paint to water ratio. If I have more water, it's going to be lighter. If I have less water, it's going to be darker, right? So that should be pretty clear that that's a very easy way. Pardon me. With oil painting or opaque painting, like acrylic or oil or gouache or egg temper or what have you, you're adding white. Well, we're adding water. We're not going to be using white with our watercolor at this point. So that's how we're going to vary our values, by using the water. To darken our colors, we're going to be using, and again, you should have watched the color mixing video already on using a limited palette. And if you haven't seen that, then go watch that. Now, that one's done in oil, but the way we're going to be doing it is the exact same thing. It's just we have to skew it a little differently for watercolor, just a bit. The basic concepts are the same, except instead of black, we'll be using Payne's Gray. So we'll be using Payne's Gray to darken anything that's in the blues or the purples or the greens. And we'll be using burnt umber to darken anything that's in the yellows, the oranges, and or the reds. So let's do that real quick. If I want to darken yellow, and I've got a yellow, a lemon yellow, or it's a little green. Is this what we call lemony yellow? It's because it's leaning towards the green side of yellow. It's not green, not like grass, but it does have green in it, as opposed to this, which is a little oranger yellow. Then we have a brown yellow, which is a yellow ochre, which is a little cooler or a little greener. This is a yellow, a raw sienna, which is a yellow that's a little oranger, but also, in the brown family, but it's on the orange side. This is on the green side. We also have a red that's a little bit more orange. We don't have any of our reds that are truly a true red. We'd have to mix that as far as that goes. And maybe we'll start there first. Because the first thing whenever we mix a color is to start with the hue. If I've got these two yellows, I don't have a true yellow. I have a yellow that's more green, and I have a yellow that's more orange. But if I mix the two together, I can then get a yellow that's, pretty close to true yellow. Okay? And because I'm mixing, these are the brightest yellows I've got, that means that my resulting color will be bright. In other words, very intense. High chroma. Those high intensity, high chroma, they mean the exact same thing. Okay. If I want my colors to stay more intense, higher chroma, you know, mix from the yellows, and we're not going to be mixing these would be duller. I could still mix these and get what we call, well, a true yellow, but it's not going to be at its brightest point. It's going to be a true yellow that's much duller, where it has less intensity. Okay, so the concept would still work with these two yellows, but it's not going to be as intense. If we want a really bright, intense, you know, sunshiny day sort of yellow, you know, or a sun in the background or something like that, we're going to be sticking with our more intense, brighter colors. And we do the same thing with the reds. If I want to, now, for those of you that have this is the old palette I used to have in class. If you have the newer palette, where you have like yellow and then orange, and then it's like, I think, naphtho red, and then we have a dioxazine purple, and then I think we have like a cobalt blue hue, or maybe ultramarine blue, and then maybe a phthalo blue or viridian. And but anyways, between these, and I think we have a lemon yellow hue or something like that. You want to mix the closest colors. So let's say I was trying to mix a yellow green. Well, yellow green has green in it, but I don't want to use just any green. I'd want to be using the green that's closest to yellow. Now that's viridian, so that's got some blue in it. This has got sap green. This has got some yellow to it. Now, if I don't have the sap green and I've only got viridian, and the rest that I've got are blues, use your viridian. That's going to be the closest you have. If I've got sap green, well, then I'll use my sap green. It just depends on my palette. But if I've only got one green, that's the green I'm using. But because you want the two colors that are closest to yellow green, well, yellow green is yellow and it's green. So we'd start with I'm using sap green. I could also use my viridian in a different mixture just to show you that I'm still going to get a pretty good mixture out of it. It's just that this is closer than this, but you want as close as possible. And then I use my lemony yellow, my yellow light, or my Windsor lemon, or whatever it is. So in other words, my yellow that's more yellow green, which is what your lemon yellows are. And if I mix a little bit of this green into it, I can get very intense, almost too intense. You'd almost never use this color. You can get very intense yellow greens. Okay, that's a very nice, intense yellow green. And again, that's the one that's actually further away. If I use the sap green, again, I can also get very intense yellow greens using that color. That's got a little bit more blue to it, so if I needed to, I could add a little bit more yellow to it, and this would be the yellower side. Okay. So of the three, those look pretty bright. There is a slight difference in chroma, but not much, because whenever we're mixing color, so if I'm trying to mix a yellow green, I'm going to be mixing whatever green with my yellow that's closest to green. I wouldn't want to be using orange because that's going to lose intensity. In fact, if I did this, let's say I used this color, which is an orange yellow, and I used this green, which is a blue green. Well, these are farther away, and because they're farther away, it'll be a yellow green, but it'll be a yellow green that's much less intense. So this will be the brightest yellow green I can get. It's not as intense as that first one because my lemon yellow is closer to yellow green than my yellow orange. They're further away on the color wheel. And so you're going to want to get the colors that are closest. So let's say I wanted to mix a middle yellow, or pardon me, a true red, that Christmas red. I've got 4 different reds here. Now again, if you're the ones that have the more simpler limited palette, I believe you have Naphthol or Grumbacher red or Windsor red and an orange. Well, then you'd use the Windsor red, supposed to be pretty close to true red. And so you wouldn't need, if you have Windsor red, you wouldn't really need to mix true red. You've already got it. But you also have dioxazine purple. So if you had true red and you need to make a red violet, well, depending on how much purple to red, you can get a whole spectrum of red violets, and they'll be very intense. Or if you took that true red and you mixed it with orange, again, you're going to get a whole spectrum of scarlet reds, depending on how much orange to how much red, and it'll stay very intense. Once you start having more colors like this, well, then you got to be a little more cautious. This right here is a alizarin crimson. This is a cad red light, true cadmium. This is a Theo rose, or Windsor rose, or Grumbacher rose. That's pretty much, they're all the same color. And then this is a Theo violet, or a Windsor red violet, or there's another term for it, but I can't remember. There's like 30 names of some of these colors, and so just depending on the manufacturer, it's going to be a different name. But let's say I had to mix my true red. If I don't have Windsor red or Grumbacher red, I'm going to have to mix it. So if I've got the one with the cadmiums, or if I've got a pan set where I don't really have, you know, a true red and we have to mix it, I'm going to use my red, the two reds that are closest. So now I'm going to mix it with one of these. Well, I don't want to do the violet. That's too far away. So what I would want to do is I'm going to decide whether I'm going to use my rose, or I want to use my alizarin crimson. Now both of these are red violets. The alizarin crimson's red violet, so is the rose, but the rose is a little bit bluer. It's a little further away. So I'm going to use alizarin crimson and cad red medium, and I can mix a nice, beautiful true red. Okay, that's nice and intense. Whenever you're mixing a color, you start with the hue, and you want to have the hue as bright as possible. You can always dull the hue down, make it less intense, but you can't take a color that's duller and make it brighter, well, unless you're adding another color to your palette. But if I have, let's show you a different mixture. Let's say I took this red orange, and let's say I used the red violet. I can still get a true red, but this true red won't be as bright because the colors are further apart. So this is going to be the color I would get. And it's just a little bit softer, and it may not read that well on the camera because it's a little nuanced. The good thing with watercolor is it's easier to keep intensity. The bad thing with watercolor is if you're trying to get a neutral color, you might have to work it a little bit more. But I'm going to give you the secret of how to deal with it. So again, if I need to make a nice red, take the reds that are the closest to what you're trying to get to. This is red orange, but it's very red. This is red violet, but it's very red. And again, whereas this is just a little bit too much purple. And I wouldn't use this one because this is burnt sienna, or in other words, a red brown, which is fine. This brown right here is a little bit on the orange side. So if I was trying to make it true red, I'd add a little bit of the alizarin crimson. This is true red, but it's a true red that's much duller, less intense because it's been using brown. So 3 different reds there. To keep it bright, we want the ones closest to the color we're mixing. This is the closest on the orange side, this is the closest on the violet side, and we got the best red of all of those. If I didn't have purple, like some of you again have dioxazine purple, if I don't have a true purple and I've got to mix my true purple, again, I've got 4 blues here. I've got 2 blues that are close to green, and I have another 2 blues that are closer to purple. Basically, I have one that's true blue. I have another one that's a blue violet. So I have ultramarine blue, which is blue violet. I have cobalt blue, which is true blue. I have a cerulean blue, which is blue green, and I have a phthalo blue, which is a blue green. I want to use the blue that's closest to purple if I'm mixing a purple, and I want to use the red that's closest to purple. Well, this red violet is my most violet red. That's the one I want to use. I don't want to use the orange red. That's too far away. So I'm going to take this red violet, and if I didn't have this color, well, then I'd have to use either my alizarin crimson or my Theo rose, and then I'm going to use my ultramarine blue, and I don't want to think of it as names. People start memorizing names, and the thing is, you want to memorize what color is that paint look. You want to be able to analyze the paint. Oh, that looks more purple. Oh, that looks more green. Oh, that looks more true blue. So this is a blue violet that I'm mixing with a red violet, and because they're both closer to purple, I can get this gorgeous purple, just the most beautiful purple you could ever want. Stand, gotta have it, that sort of thing. Okay. If I'm mixing colors that are too far away, let's mix another purple. I'm using this red orange. I would not do this, by the way, not for the color strategy we're going to be using, but if I mix that with this blue green, I'm going to get a far different type of purple. Okay, this is a purple as well, but it's getting closer to gray. It's a gray purple. All right, and there's times I may want that, but for what we're doing with the way we're going about color mixing, again, we want the brightest, not the dullest. Okay. So the first thing we do is we mix the hue. Now again, we've mixed purples, we've mixed reds. I guess we didn't mix an orange, so I guess we got to backtrack here a little bit. If I'm going to mix an orange, I'm going to use the red that's closer to orange. And I'm going to use the yellow that's closest to orange, which is this yellow. And again, by doing this, I can get a really bright, beautiful, intense orange color. Okay. What if I use the ones that were further apart? Well, I'm going to get a duller color. If I used this yellow green, or this green yellow, or greener side of yellow, and I'm washing my brush out each time so I keep it nice and pure, these mixtures, and then I mix it with that red violet. Well, this is orange too, but it's much duller. It's almost, once again, we're almost to gray. It's a substantial difference. Okay. So there used to be a watercolor book. Well, they're still around, but, and I don't recommend it. It's because it's mostly like it's a sort of a color recipe book. And if you're mixing 10,000 different colors or 100,000 different colors, how are you going to memorize 100,000 different recipes? You're not. So what we're going to try to do is I'm trying to get you to mix color by intuitively understanding the color wheel and then how it applies to mixing the colors. That will get you, you'll be better off that way, and it's much more practical. It's impractical the way that some people try to talk about watercolor. It's just ridiculous. And I'm always, about simpler is better. And this is the way that was taught for hundreds of years in ateliers. They weren't trying to be more complex. They were trying to be less complex, and through that simplicity, you could do much more advanced things. And that's what we're trying to do. The next thing, we did oranges, we did reds, we did true reds, we did yellow greens, we did purples. Now we're going to do green. And again, if I want to do a very, very beautiful green, now again, if I don't have blues, I could certainly, if I've got Windsor green, well, that's a blue green, which is close to Viridian. So I think on that palette, the palette from the tubes that I recommend had Windsor green in it, which is about the same. It's the same hue as Viridian, but it's 20 times more potent. It's much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Intense, not intense. It's tinting strength. There we go. So its ability to move a color. It's a dye color. And so you got to be careful because it's so strong it'll take over a mixture if you're not careful. But if I'm trying to do like true green, this is too blue. So if I was going to do true green, I want to use a yellow that's closer to green. So I'd be using my green or yellow and adding enough of it. Now this is, oh, nope, this is still got enough. I think it needs just a little bit more of the blue back into it. But right there is about what I'd call true green. Some sort of, emerald, luck of the Irish type of green or what have you. Beautiful green. Again, we did it by using the green that's closer to, or the green that we've got, and then the green that we had was too blue. So we then moved it with a little bit of yellow that's yellow-green. Now, let's say I didn't have green. Let's say I don't have any green at all. Well, then I'm going to have to use blue, but I'm going to use the blue that's closer to green. Now, this right here is called phthalo blue. Now, again, this is a dye color. It has a high tinting strength, which just means it will take over your mixture. You need 20 times more yellow than you have blue in order for that to be a green. So this is 20 times stronger than my yellow. We want to remember that. So when I mix it, I'm actually going to probably start with my yellow and put my yellow over here and then take just a little bit of blue and add it to it slowly. And again, because this blue right here is a blue-green, it's so close to green, and the yellow that I used was so close to yellow, the yellow-green that I used was so close to green, that I can get a very nice, very beautiful, very intense green color. That's in fact a little bit on the yellow side, so we had just a little bit more blue. There we go. Again, very, very nice color, very intense. Couldn't ask for better, better green. What a lovely color. Okay. So There we go. I think we mixed purples, we mixed oranges, we've mixed greens. Let me just show you what happens if we don't follow this idea of keeping the colors that are closest to the color that we want to make. Let's go ahead and clean up this sludge that got into my yellow. Let's say I picked a yellow that's too orange. Because again, people are like, oh, anyways, this book, I started on this whole idea of this book and then I moved away from it. There's a book called Blue and Yellow Don't Make Green. And it's this concept I'm trying to talk about. It's kind of a deceptive title. But what it's trying to talk about is look at the difference of this green versus the other greens that we just mixed. This green is not the same. It's sort of an olive green. Or, you know, Army Fatigue's green. It's much duller, much less intensity. It's a gray green almost, in fact. And when people see that, they go, how is that possible? That's yellow, that's blue. What happened? Well, we have a yellow that's more orange and a blue that's more purple. And so they're so far away on the color wheel, the further away the colors are, the duller the resulting mixture. The closer the colors are, the brighter the resulting mixture. So whenever we're mixing our hue, which is the first thing we do, we want to mix that hue. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use the colors that are closest. Now, again, we're starting off with a very simple way of controlling color, but it's very effective. And you could use it, your entire career of working with watercolor. Now, the way I work with watercolor, I'm very direct. I don't do a whole lot of multiple glazings. You're not going to see me do 10 different layers of a glaze to get this one subtle color that I want. That's not the way I work, and I'm not to say that that's a bad way of working. It's a fine way of working. It's just not the way that I work. And so if you're going to work that way, you have to understand watercolor in a much more complicated way. There's all kinds of things you have to understand about watercolor in order to work in glazing several different layers. Otherwise, you're going to have to live with a mess if you don't know what you're doing. So we're going to talk about this in the most easiest, most practical way to work in watercolor. I work in lots of different mediums, so again, I don't get too far detailed into the medium. I know enough about it if I want to kind of do some glazing and stuff, but it's not the normal way that I work. But there's certain people that work in watercolor all the time. That's the only medium they work in, and they really get into, oh, well, let's see, is this a color mixed with white or black? Is it a high tinting non-staining color? Is it a staining a semi-staining translucent color? Is it a non-staining opaque color? And you start looking at all these subsets, and then you go, okay, now if I mix this with that, and you have all these different ways of mixing, there's 5 subsets, and when you mix them back and forth, they do different things. And it's just much more complex. I don't work with watercolor that way. This is much more simple. So that's how we vary the hue. And vary the hue by using the colors that are closest to it to mix that hue. Now again, for those of you that are like, well, I've already got orange and I've already got green. Now your green's gonna be too blue if you have the Windsor green. And so you will have to shift it because there's blue greens, there's true greens, there's yellow greens, there's all kinds of greens. If you're like, well, I've got orange. Well, again, there's all kinds of oranges. There are yellow oranges. There are red oranges. You can take that orange to modify it. Same thing with purple. The purple is, I don't have to do true purple, but there's all kinds of purples that aren't true purple. And so you can take purple with different types of red, and if you have more red to purple, it's going to be on the redder side. If you have less red to purple, it's going to be still on the red-violet, but closer to violet. Same thing, purple with blue, blue-violets. Again, you can modify that all the way around the hues. If I had red, yellow, blue, or in other words, naphthol red, yellow medium, and cobalt blue hue, and then I had orange, and I had like a Windsor green, and I had dioxazine purple or Windsor violet or Grumbacher violet. Again, I would be mixing between those primaries and secondaries to get the tertiaries and every range in between those tertiaries. Those are, and if you don't understand that, again, go ahead and watch the color wheel video, and it'll help you understand that more and more. So we're going to we first vary the hues, then we vary the value. And like I was saying, to make something lighter, we just add water. We're in watercolor, therefore we're going to add water. We're not using white. If you start using white with watercolor to do it properly, you now have to start talking about opacity, and it has its own rules a little differently. Whereas if you're using watercolor without white, for the most part, you're basically doing glazing, which has its own rules. So there's some subtle rules that are slightly different depending on what medium you're using, but that should be understandable, whether you're using Prismacolor or whether I'm using pastel or whether I'm using egg tempera or whether I'm using gouache or whether I'm using casein or oil or acrylic or watercolor or you name it. There's subtle differences. Or encaustics, they all have their subtleties, but the basis of this idea of mixing is the same. It's just you're doing it with different mediums. So to make something lighter, pretty easy. If I've got this purple, I want it to be lighter, I add water to it. If I want it to be darker, I add paint to it. And if it got to be darker still, keep adding paint, right? Okay. But there's a point at which this won't get any darker no matter how much paint I add. That's as dark as that will get. And so if I want to go darker, I have to do something else to modify the value. Same thing with blue. If I want this blue to be any darker than this right here, that's as dark as it goes. I can't, even if I add more, it's not going to get any darker. It's just going to get thicker. There's a point at which this won't get any darker without modifying it using something to darken the color. All right. And so we're going to talk about how to do that. And the way is we're going to be using one of two colors to darken colors. Okay. We're either going to be using Payne's Gray or we're going to be using burnt umber. Now, burnt umber is a dark, 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 dark orange, which means it has yellow and it has red. Whereas Payne's Gray is a dark, 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 dull blue. And so it's going to add blue to everything. This will add orange to everything. So when people sometimes, when they first start painting, they go, well, I got this yellow and I want to darken my yellow. And they go, well, I'll darken my yellow with black, right? Everyone has black. Well, first off, we don't use black. We use Payne's Gray. Now, if you don't have, if you have a pan color and it only has black, well, you can use black. But usually I'll take that black and I'll put a little bit of blue with it because Payne's Gray is basically just ivory black and phthalo blue is what most companies use for their Payne's Gray. So again, you can mix that. You got black, you got yourself a dark blue transparent green, blue green, boom, you can make Payne's Gray, no problem. But if we use Payne's Gray to darken yellow, what do we have? We've got a green. Why is that? I said Payne's Gray is a dark, dark, dark blue. So yeah, it's going to add blue to anything. If I try to darken red with Payne's Gray, it's going to go purple. Okay, so sometimes people are like, how do I darken it and keep it yellow? Well, again, now there's parts with watercolor we have to remember because there's certain pigment can only be darkened so much in watercolor, so we have to kind of pull out all stops. And this is, I'm going to tell you how to darken. It's really simple with everything but orange and yellow. If I've got red and I want to darken this red color, I can add burnt umber to it, and I can keep adding burnt umber, and I can keep adding burnt umber, and I can keep adding burnt umber. Okay, but there's a problem here. What happens if I want to get darker than that red right there? How am I going to do that? Right? So there does become a point at which you'd be like, how am I going to get that any darker? Well, one way to get that darker is you might have to shift to a different red, because this red-orange is lighter than this red, so I could use this. Now, the other thing that we can do is we can actually start using some, if we're going really dark, we can start using this concept. I want it to be darker. So as I darken this, and this may not be a big deal. Again, I didn't gain that much. This is a little bit darker, half a step. What if I want to go darker than that? Well, the only way to go darker than this is by doing one of two things. We could say, all right, well, let's do this. Let's take, we have a dark, dark, dark. This is a dark, dark, dark orange, right? And you could say, well, we still need it to be red. So let's say we did our red violet. And then we got our darkest color possible. Okay. Now this is purple. Now, between purple and orange is going to be red. So again, I could use this. So we start using secondary colors. So somewhere between this purple and this dark orange is that red that we need that's warm enough. So now again, this is dark, this is getting it darker, okay? So, you know, now we got something that feels like it's red because we're using, if you have on the color wheel, between purple and orange, you're going to pass through the red spectrum. This is going to be about as dark as we can get that red, and it's pretty dang dark. Most people say you can't get certain colors on watercolor, and it's not true. It's just they need to know how to do it and how to use the color wheel. And we're using the concept of between purple and orange, it passes through the red spectrum. Between orange and green, it passes through the yellow spectrum. Between green and purple, it passes through the blue spectrum. So the red is about the one that we, like some of these blues, you know, like again, if we're this dark, no big deal. You know, to darken it with a Payne's gray, no big thing. We'll be able to get this as dark as we need to, right? If I have to darken one of these greens with a Payne's gray, again, I'm going to be able to get it as dark as I need to. So again, I can darken these blues down as much as I like, or these greens as much as I like, or even the violet with the Payne's gray. It's not a problem. The ones that become an issue are the reds, the oranges, and the yellows. So I just showed you how I was able to get a nice dark, rich red. And the way I did it, once again, because it won't get any darker than this until we pull out this. Well, you need the darker paint, and the darkest paint besides Payne's gray is purple. So what do? We mixed up, and I was trying to keep it a little bit on the red side. This is still red violet, and then between red violet and this orange, because that's what this is, a dark orange. Between those two, it will pass through the red spectrum. Like so. And again, we've got a very, very dark red. Now, that seems to have gone red-violet, and it has. If we needed this to become a little bit, we can add, you might say, why don't we add this? Well, if we do, it's going to lighten it because this pigment is lighter. The only thing that we might be able to do is, now, and we can't do too much of this because this is lighter too, it'll lighten this just a little bit. But if we wanted to make this a little bit more towards, swing it from the red-violet to, again, across that red spectrum a little bit more, again, we have to be careful with this because it will lighten this as well. So we've lost a step of value, but now we've put it back into the red-orange family, okay? And still, that's a pretty nice dark color. Okay, so sometimes when people are doing watercolor, they go, well, you can't get really dark colors with watercolor. It's meant to be this washy, splishy, splashy stuff, and that's not true. You just need to know how to darken your color. So again, with red, we can use the burnt umber. In fact, if we wanted to have like an in between, make it lighter with water, but as we darken this, we can use again our burnt sienna, which is red. Isn't that a beautiful color? So we can darken this a little bit with that. We can then start to darken it again with that burnt umber. And then there's a point at which we're going to have to use the burnt umber and the violet to get this, again, even darker still. But by doing this, you'll be able to get very, very, very dark reds. Now, the red's a little easier. The two hardest are the oranges, to some extent. And we'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to just rinse this off here, like so. All right. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and take our orange. I'm going to mix my orange. So that's my red orange. This is my yellow orange. And somewhere between the two is going to be true orange. We don't want it too yellow. We don't want it too red. Okay, that's a beautiful orange. If we wanted a slider, we could add water. No big deal. To make it darker, though, we're going to have to start doing something else. Now, I could do one of two things. I could say, hey, this is orange, and so therefore I can take my two browns, this is my oranger yellow, and this is my red brown. Trying to rinse that off so it's not so dirty with the yellow. And I could use this, and I could darken my orange with that, and we certainly can. Absolutely. It's only going to darken it so far, though. Now we still have to go dark. We have to go a lot darker. We're only right here. That's almost like maybe a step 6 on the value scale. Maybe a step 5. Not quite, I don't think. I think it's closer to a step 6. Again, if you don't understand that, go to the value scale I sent. That you have. You can either look on the YouTube channel where it talks about that, or if you're in one of my classes, I've actually sent you one to reference. To go darker, we have to add, and we'll just add the Payne's, not Payne's Gray. Don't do that. Use the burnt umber. So the burnt umber, because of dark orange, we can get this down to here. Okay. Alright, so we can certainly do that. Alright. Now to get it any darker than this, to get this orange any darker, we could do something like between orange and red, but these are lighter. That's not going to work. We need a darker color. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to start to get a little creative here. So what we're going to do, now as things go darker, you're going to add, it's going to be, you're going to have a little bit of blue that will be starting to be added to this, and that's fine. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use two darker colors. I'm basically going to be using my Hooker's green, but Hooker has yellow to it. Also has some blue, but it has yellow to it. We're also going to be using red. This has blue to it as well. However, there's also red and yellow in there. And so we're going to mix this with the paint, with the burnt umber, which also has orange, and all of a sudden we'll be able to get much darker oranges. Okay, that's getting darker. Now we're getting so dark that the only place to go, if we need it any darker than this, and we're about to one step before we can go about as dark as we can go on that. And what we do is we add just a little bit of that Payne's Gray. It's just, this is for the last step to go where it's just going to be just enough orange left in there for that to read like an orange. Okay, and understand this is what oranges look like when they're really, really dark. Sometimes I have people go, no, I want an orange that's this bright, but it's like a step 1 on the value scale. And I'm like, doesn't exist. Because this is what you're talking about if you're a step 1 on the value scale. And so anyway, sometimes, again, that's why we want to start looking at that color scale so we get used to seeing what colors actually are. When they get really dark, they'll get that, oh, that's a brown. Well, browns have a color. Browns are either red, or they're oranges, or they're yellows. All browns. And so when you look at a brown, you shouldn't just go, yeah, brown. Because it's not, oh, just brown. It's either a red-orange brown, or a red-brown, or a red-violet brown, or a yellow-green brown, or a yellow brown, or an orange brown. And they have a value. So we want to be able to know how to do that. Okay, so that was how we darkened our oranges. And again, to lighten it's easy. We just add water. And then we're going to say, all right, well, we want to darken our yellow. Now, yellow is the hardest of all, because we start off with a pigment that is just so light. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, first off, I have to mix mine because I don't have true yellow. Now I could darken this too, and I could darken that too, a little differently. But let's start like we're trying to do true yellow. Okay, that's true yellow. Now I could darken it by using my yellow browns, because each of these, this is a little on the green side, that's a little bit on the orange side, mix them in between, and we have a true yellow. And that's nice if I'm trying to go that dark. Boom, I don't have to do anything. Boom, there's my my yellow on that's a step 6 on the value scale, somewhere between a step 6 and a step 7. And if I wanted to mix in between these two, this would be then, this would be, a little bit lighter, and this would be, like a step, 8 or something. And then, we could go ahead and get a little bit lighter, and this would be, almost a step, 8.5, and then we take this, or what have you. And, this would be, whoops, it's getting a little more intense. It didn't really change its value. There we go. And then this right here would be something, like yeah, I think this is almost a 7.5. But anyways, you could vary, their values, with water and stuff like that. So if this is a 9 and this is like a 9.5 and this is an 8, maybe it's a 7.5. But anyways, and then that would be a 6.5. That's fine. That's the easy stuff. It's going darker than this. So to go darker than this, again, we can add this. Now this we have to remember that this burnt umber also has a little bit, it's on the orange side, so it might shift it a little bit. I don't think it shifted as much as I was afraid it was going to. This is a little on the red side. So we might have drifted a little into the yellow orange, but let's see. No, I still think that's pretty good yellow. Still, we're only about somewhere between a step 5 and a step 4 for that yellow. We still have a long range to darken this yellow, and this is where we start getting creative. Because again, I'm not going to be able to darken any further than that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead. All right. Well, now we're going to take our sap green, and we're going to take our burnt umber, because between orange and green we cross the yellow spectrum. It won't be bright like these colors. It's for the duller, darker colors. So between green and this burnt umber, we're going to have yellow. So this is yellow getting darker still. We can go ahead and do that. We can even add the sap green, which again has yellow in it. This, again, that's going to give us a little bit deeper color. That's too green. Need a little bit more of this. Okay, there we go. And again, so this is getting now towards like almost, a step, 2.5, somewhere between 2 and 3. And if we want to go darker than that, again, we're just going to add just a tiny bit of that Payne's gray, and we'll be able to go ahead and take our yellows all the way from lightest light to the darkest dark. Okay. So we did the oranges, talked about reds, we talked about darkening yellows. What I want you guys to do is I want you guys to look at the color scale, or each one of these colors can go from the lightest light, which would be somewhere about almost a step 10. If it's a true step 10, people would say, well, that's actually supposed to be white. Well, for painting, it's a 9.5. There's still color. It's got to be so light where you can barely see color, but it's not white paper. So you're going to go from the lightest all the way down to the darkest you can go. And we've done that the darkest you can go with reds, the oranges, and the yellows. Again, if it's yellow or red or orange, we're going to be using that burnt umber. But to darken the red, what did we do? We brought in purple and put in between purple and this we're darkening the red, so we were using between this and this burnt umber and the purple, it will cross the red spectrum. Between, again, we're using secondary colors, and it was between orange, this is a dark orange, and purple, you cross the red spectrum. So we're using that to darken the reds. And then we said, fine. Well, then when we got to the darkest dark that we could with orange, because we couldn't get really much darker than here, well, then we had to get creative again, where we said, all right, well, we're going to take again, we're going to take a little bit of the purple, which has red in it, and a little bit of the yellowish green that we've got, and we're going to mix between those two, and then add that to the burnt umber, and then we dropped a little bit lower for the orange and that sort of thing, and we kept doing that to make it darker and darker and darker and darker. Kind of in the mid range, we used sort of these yellow oranges, which, well, these yellow browns and the burnt sienna, which is a brown red. But what if I didn't have those? What if I didn't have those colors? Well, then all we do is we'd go ahead and darken with the brown as long as we could, and then towards the very end we'd start bringing in red violet and using a little bit of green with the burnt umber, and that would work. That will work just fine. Okay, so again, and then with the blues, the greens, and the purples, very easy to darken those with Payne's gray. That'll be very easy. So I want you guys to make a color scale, which again is every color. Well, when I say every color, it's all the hues, which means red, yellow, blue, orange, green, and purple. So all 6 primaries and secondaries, those 6, and then darken them from the lightest all the way to the darkest. You want 10 steps for each one, and that'll be 60 colors in that color scale. So that's what I want you to do. So go ahead and do this. If you do this, you'll learn to control your colors in a much better way. If you don't do it, good luck. You're going to have a much longer road. But the color scales are a really good way an exercise to help you control your colors going from light to dark. All right? So give that a shot. This has been Kevin McCain with Kevin McCain Studios and Idaho Art Classes. Have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye now.